Welcome, dear listeners. We are back to Advanced Series Podcast, where we explore the intricacies of identity, culture, and language. I'm Daisy, and today we're delving into a topic that touches the very core of who we are: identity and belonging. How do our culture, nationality, and the language we speak define who we are? And how do these forces create not only a sense of self, but a sense of belonging, or sometimes displacement?
That's right, Daisy. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the complexities of identity and how it's shaped by factors we often take for granted. What does it mean to belong to a culture or a language? Is identity something static or something that evolves over time? We'll explore these questions through the lens of literature, philosophy, and personal experiences. And trust me, you'll want to stay until the end because this episode is going to challenge the way you think about your own identity. We're not just here to give you answers. We're here to provoke deeper thought and reflection.
Exactly, Liam. And to keep things engaging, we'll be drawing inspiration from classic literature, cinema, and modern thought leaders, from the works of James Baldwin and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie to films like The Farewell and In the Mood for Love. We're unpacking how culture, nationality, and language create layers of identity. So, wherever you are, whether you're on your morning run, commuting to work, or relaxing at home, stay with us as we unravel the complex and often contradictory elements that shape who we are. Let's start with a fundamental yet deceptively complex question. What is identity? On the surface, identity seems straightforward. It's who you are. But is it really that simple? Identity is a mosaic shaped by a multitude of factors: culture, nationality, race, language, gender, history, and personal experiences. And perhaps most importantly, it's influenced by belonging, or the lack of it.
Absolutely. Philosopher Charles Taylor once said that our identity is shaped by the recognition or misrecognition of others. In his work, The Politics of Recognition, he argues that being seen or not seen by society affects how we see ourselves. This is where belonging becomes a crucial part of identity. It's not just about who you think you are, but also about whether your community affirms that identity.
It's such an important concept, and speaking of recognition, I'm reminded of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's powerful TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story. She argues that reducing people to a single narrative, whether based on their nationality, culture, or language, creates dangerous stereotypes. As she put it, the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. When we are viewed through a single lens, we lose the richness and complexity of our identity.
Yes, and that's where intersectionality comes in. Kimberlé Crenshaw introduced this term to help us understand how different aspects of a person's identity, like race, gender, class, and nationality, intersect and create unique experiences of oppression or privilege. For example, a black woman's experience in America will differ from a white woman's or a black man's. It's crucial to understand these multiple dimensions of identity if we're going to talk meaningfully about belonging.
Exactly, Liam. And now, let's talk about language, something that deeply affects identity but is often overlooked. Language is more than just a tool for communication. It's the vessel of culture, history, and power. Let's focus on one word in particular: belonging. It comes from the Middle English word belangen, which means to go along with, to relate to. Isn't it fascinating how language itself can either include or exclude? If you've ever been in a country where you didn't speak the language, you've likely felt like an outsider, no matter how friendly the people were.
That's so true. I'm reminded of the movie The Farewell, where the main character, Billy, struggles to connect with her Chinese family because she was raised in America. It's not just about language, it's about identity. Billy lives in two worlds, American and Chinese, and yet feels like she belongs to neither. That's a form of cultural dislocation that many people experience, especially in a globalized world.
That's a perfect example, Liam. And it leads us to the concept of bilingualism or multilingualism. Many people live in multiple languages, and with each language they speak, their sense of identity can shift. Take, for example, the famous writer Vladimir Nabokov. He was fluent in both Russian and English and famously said, "I think like a genius, I write like a distinguished author, and I speak like a child." That quote highlights the vulnerability that comes with speaking a language that isn't your native tongue. It can make you feel powerful and powerless at the same time.
That brings us to a term I want to explore today: code switching. Code switching is when someone alternates between languages or speech patterns, depending on the social context. But it's more than just switching between English and Spanish, for example. It's about adapting your identity to different environments. You may speak differently at home with your family than you do at work or with friends. Code switching isn't just linguistic, it's cultural.
That's a great point. And it reminds me of the writer James Baldwin, who once wrote, "It is astonishing that in a country so devoted to the individual, so many people should be afraid to speak in their own voice." This ties into the idea that people often feel the need to mask their true selves, whether through accent, language, or cultural markers, in order to fit in. In doing so, they may lose a piece of their identity, their authentic voice.
That brings us to our next vocabulary word: diaspora. For people living in the diaspora, immigrants, refugees, or even expatriates, the concept of belonging can feel fragmented. You may live in one country but have your roots in another. You may speak one language at home and another in public. This duality can be enriching, but it can also create a deep sense of alienation.
So, Liam, I want to circle back to literature for a moment. There's a beautiful line in Jhumpa Lahiri's novel, The Namesake. He wonders how his parents had done it, had left their families behind, left their language, and settled here in a place where no one knew them. This captures the feeling of starting anew in a foreign country, building an identity in a place where you may not fully belong.
And yet, this quest for belonging, to feel understood and accepted, is universal. Sociologists often discuss social identity theory, which suggests that our self-concept is largely shaped by the groups we belong to. But what happens when you belong to multiple groups and they don't align? This is a critical question in today's world, where hyphenated identities, like African American, Asian American, are common. But do these labels capture the fullness of who we are, or do they create further divisions?
Exactly. And this is where belonging and identity become deeply intertwined. Identity is not a static thing, and belonging is never guaranteed. It is negotiated, shaped by the external world as much as by our internal sense of self. So here's a challenge for our listeners. Think critically about your own identity. What elements of your culture, nationality, and language have shaped who you are today?
And here's another layer to consider. As Toni Morrison once said, definitions belong to the definers, not the defined. Who gets to define your identity? Is it you, your family, your community, or society at large? Are you defining yourself, or are you living within the definitions imposed on you by others?
Thank you for joining us today as we explored the profound questions surrounding identity and belonging. We hope this conversation sparks your own reflections. Don't forget to share your thoughts with us, whether it's through comments, emails, or poetry. We're here to listen and we'd love to hear your stories.
Yes, your stories are powerful and valuable. Whether you've struggled with the feeling of not belonging or you've found a sense of community in unexpected places, your experiences contribute to the larger conversation about identity. Every time we reflect on these questions, we add new layers of understanding, not just about ourselves, but about the world we live in.
That's so true, Liam. And as we talked about earlier, belonging is more than just a feeling. It's a critical part of who we are. So many of the world's great works of art, literature, and music are rooted in this search for identity and connection. Think of how Toni Morrison explored the idea of belonging in Beloved, or how Khaled Hosseini wrote about identity and loss in The Kite Runner. These stories resonate deeply because they touch on something we all experience at some point in our lives.
Exactly, Daisy. In fact, I've been thinking about something else that connects to today's discussion: migration. Whether it's migration within a country or across borders, people are often navigating multiple identities at once. How do we carry our home with us when we leave? How do we integrate new cultural elements while holding on to our heritage? The tension between past and present, tradition and change, is at the heart of belonging.
That's a powerful thought, Liam. And it's not just about physical migration. Many of us experience internal migrations too, as we grow and evolve. Who we were 5 years ago isn't who we are today, and that's okay. As we encounter new ideas, new people, and new places, our sense of identity shifts. But in that shift, there's always the question of whether we find belonging or lose it.
And maybe, Daisy, that's the beauty of it. Identity and belonging aren't fixed. Perhaps they're fluid. Maybe we're meant to move through these spaces, creating connections as we go, without needing a final, permanent answer to who we are. It reminds me of something from Walt Whitman. Do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. We're not just one thing. We contain layers, and that complexity is what makes the search for belonging both challenging and rewarding.
Whitman's words are the perfect way to end today's episode, Liam. We contain multitudes, and that's what makes our journey through life so rich and meaningful. Thank you all for being part of this conversation on identity and belonging. We hope it's inspired you to think about your own story in a new way. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep connecting.
Thanks for tuning in. We can't wait to hear your thoughts, so share them with us and join the conversation. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone. See you next time on Advanced Series Podcast to expert your English fluency with us.